microservices, and I love hearing about microservices, so I'm really excited to hear what Steve has to say. So yeah, this is a bit of a longer session, which is really good because we can go like really deep into it. So please welcome Steve, so glad to have him.
Thanks all. So yeah, I'm Steve Mellor, test architect at Rock, and this is a discussion, a presentation, a talk about a monolith to microservices evolution project at e-commerce. I know it says on the sheet it's CRM, it's actually a CMS, content management system, but it's a front-end e-commerce journey. So I will make a start. A little bit about me. I know not everyone does one, but I think I've been really lucky to move around in the software testing industry. I started 24 years ago. Like a lot of people, got into software testing through a technical support role, and I've moved around a little bit inside the industry since then. But for me, techniques and technology are my passion, so I kind of moved back into a more hands-on role. Although, as a test architect, I do deliver some services, but more as advisory capacity. But I do like to get my hands-on, hands-on things, and it's all about the technology for me and applying test techniques to that, and obviously making sure that we deliver the things that our customers actually want, the people we work for. So this is the people we are working for at the moment on this particular project. It's a UK brand. I'm not allowed to tell you who it is because we're under NDA, but it's a brand you've probably heard of. And it's a transformation project. I am beginning to think now that the phrase transformation is a little bit overused. I'm sure that everyone's gone through a transformation once, so surely now it's an evolution, but whatever. Anyway, yeah, there's multiple partners brought in by this organisation to deliver this particular piece of work. It's a third-party team initially. We're contracted out to work with them. There are also an offshore partner doing the actual development as well. So it's quite complicated on the inside. And that's the way that organisation runs. They're used to having things contracted out. So a lot of stuff is done by other people. They have a small team, but then all the hosting is contracted out to someone else. Management of other things is contracted out. So it's quite complicated on the inside. Externally facing, it has a single brand, and then they work with affiliates. But internally, it's quite complicated. And these are some of the problems that we encountered when we're actually doing the work we were doing. So the existing service, it's a digital acquisition channel for selling their services. It's an Angular 9 front end, a C#.NET back end. It's out of support CMS system provides all the content. It's I think it's fair to say this is probably the thing they implemented right at the start of their digital journey, and it's just become unwieldy. It's on-prem hosted. Everyone now in the cloud. As I said, it's managed by that third party, so anything they want to do takes a little bit of time. There's literally a lot of servers in their head office that just serve out all the stuff, which is data centers were old hat, as Andy was saying earlier. We kind of moved on a little bit from that into cloud. So that's where they want to take this. And one of the problems that's driving this is that because of the business processes and the tech stack, it actually hampers innovation. So if they want to release a new service or a new set of pricing out to the market and try and beat their competitors, they can't because of it just takes time because everything is difficult. The development process is difficult, the testing process is difficult, the release process is difficult. They're using a really bizarre implementation of SAFe where they have a single solution train for the release train. I can get that kind of whichever way around it is anyway. But it's completely overkill for what they do. They just sort of like eaten the SAFe book and gone, yeah. Anyway, so the goal is to do a side-by-side build. So not a strangulation pattern where they wrap the existing tech stack in APIs and then gradually switch off bits and transplant it to separate. They're actually building side-by-side a completely different set of APIs, which is going to be a modern solution. The reason for doing that is that they don't want to break the journey. So they're actually just changing it for a single affiliate. The goal is to build an MVP of one affiliate journey, and then they can compare like for like. So as I said, it's modern. So microservices backend, as I said, they're going to decompose everything into a re-implementation of microservices. React.js front end instead of Angular, that's supported obviously. Then they can obviously make it's supported. It's going to work a little bit better. They want to maintain their conversion rate, so they're not going to change anything at all. They're going to re-implement all the components on the front end. So everything's going to look the same, but behind it'll all be a modern stack. And then afterwards, assuming that the experiment works, then they're going to look to innovate. But yeah, pretty much a like for like. So the technical approach, as I said, they want to move away from on-prem, so they're going to host it into the cloud. So it's going to be into AKS. It's going to run out of the Kubernetes service on Azure. The idea will be builds are push, pull, deployed. So when a build is successful, it gets pushed out into the artifact repo, and then the AKS cluster pulls that in. They want to support all the e-commerce journeys with multiple endpoints going to be built in REST APIs for all those various components that then the front-end tech stack sits on top of. It's pretty well. There's two, probably broadly speaking, two kinds of APIs. Some are just pass-throughs to third-party services. So if you think about the case of a postcode lookup service, you don't write your own. You just use one. You wrap your own API around it. So that's pretty straightforward. There is some re-implementation of some very complex functionality, which we'll touch on, which were probably fair to say where most of the testing challenges are located. So. There's also a number of development challenges. This is for the organisation in general. They're bringing new people in to do all this, to work with some existing developers who have got some domain knowledge and some knowledge of the internal business process and all that kind of stuff. But the biggest challenges are it's going from on-prem to cloud. They're very much going from wagile to agile. They'd like to think they're agile. They're not. It's definitely wagile. It's a modern tech stack, so they are shifting. Everything's in the cloud. This is a complete deal breaker for some people. People are just like, because they're used to all that kind of idea of on-prem. It's on physical kit, they want a test-first approach. This is a big thing for senior management. The senior management have been brought in, realise that testing is really important. They want to make sure that it's tested properly up front. And then the testing challenges. So. As I mentioned, this is an old bit. As I said, it's a UK brand business. They've been around for a while. They're just used to doing things manually. It's a manual-based skill set. A lot of the testers, in fact, all the testers, they come from ex-call center staff. They have that intimate knowledge of the domain. They know the business inside out. They naturally move into testing. Well, that doesn't really give them the technical skills they need. So there's a general mistrust of automation. There's minimal test documentation, a reluctance to change. There's key man dependencies. A lot of the staff are SMEs on particular bits of the product, and when they're not in, because one of them actually bizarrely works 4 days a week, that bit of testing can't get done until they're back off their holiday. There's nothing documented. It's very ad hoc testing process, and just a general lack of any kind of documentation at all. They don't even have an organisational test strategy. And the test leadership is very much centred on their own little parts of the business. There's multiple parts of the digital side of the business, and there's just no information sharing. Everyone sort of seems to work in a little silo, which is very frustrating. So this isn't actually the list of all the components, just some of them. There's actually 12 in total. I'm just going to talk about a little bit of some of these just to give you sort of a flavour for what it actually looks like on the inside, how complicated it is, sort of the way we approach each of these things, because each of these back-end components is subtly different. Some are a lot easier to test than others. As I mentioned, the postcode lookup is pretty much a wrapper. So the first key learning for us, and this is one of the takeaways I want to get across, is that it was very important for us straight away to develop an approach. So define the approach, suggest the adaptation of best practices, gain buy-in. Now this is very important because, as I mentioned, the cultural challenges of us coming in, bringing the test expertise into this organisation where they were absolutely terrified of change. They didn't really trust automation at all. If they couldn't do it manually, they didn't really trust it. All that kind of stuff. We were bringing in all these ideas. We wanted to get, start with good principles straight away. As I mentioned, there's a lack of organisational test strategy and other test documentation. And we weren't brought in to change the organisation. We were brought in to deliver just a piece of work. So our scope wasn't to give them an organisational test strategy, tell them how to do everything, change the way they do defect management, etc., etc. It was just focused purely on this replatform project. So you can imagine always, there's the existing organisation is behind. We are sort of pretty much blazing a path and taking them on the journey of this is what good testing looks like, or at least that's what we're trying to do. And it's just getting over those cultural challenges. There are key people in the business who just don't get it, and we're operating inside part of their company but doing something completely different to them. So that was one of the cultural challenges. So it's so important for us to get the buy-in and also generate some lean documentation. As I mentioned, there was no test strategy. We produced lean documentation as much as is necessary, but as little as possible. You don't need to write War and Peace. No one ever reads 14-page test strategies ever. So you don't need to have a test approach doc that just covers everything. It just needs to be succinct, but super vital. Keep it updated, because bad doc is worse than no doc. If you've got some doc that's out of date, then people are just taking that as gospel. And if you've put 3 things down as possible approaches, and then you've selected one, why not just update the doc and say that's what you're doing? Don't leave it all in to make it really confusing. So yeah, we want to keep it. We want to start with good principles and move on with those good principles. So we plan to do test execution as you would expect. We expect there to be unit tests executed on compilation. That's something the developers do. Obviously, testers don't get involved in that. We also wanted to have some robust back-end component tests executed on the built service. So the idea there would be post-compilation, the service is spun up inside a Docker container as part of the build pipeline. We want to expose the service and run some tests on it during the pipeline, and then basically simple tests, wrap it with mocks where necessary, abort on fail, or deploy to the repository if it passed. Was our goal for the component testing. Integration testing, we wanted to bake that into scheduled and on-demand runs. So once the components are deployed, and unfortunately, as I mentioned, because of this push-pull approach, it was deployed to, a successful build would deploy to the repository, and then some point later, the cluster would update itself and pull all those new containers. We couldn't do tests on demand triggered from the build pipeline because we didn't know when it was deployed, so we just thought schedule jobs into the dev and test environments, no problem there, and give some feedback. And then ultimately, we wanted to run also some end-to-end tests when we actually got the front end. Because this is all primarily focused at the back end at the moment. The earliest part of the project, we've just purely focused on the back end components and those rebuilds of those individual API components. So for test execution, Azure DevOps, all that good stuff, because it's in Azure. Azure DevOps gives you quite a lot of things. We already had pipelines for builds, so we just replicated pipelines to actually do our test execution. So we have multiple pipelines for each service. We've got a good naming convention to make it clear what the pipeline is. Don't just create the same pipeline names and have bracket one next to it. Give it a meaningful name so people can understand when they glance at this dashboard, they can see what's happening, who's triggered it off, and what it was doing, which absolutely makes sense. We did have a few problems with shared libraries and security tokens for API endpoints. We were getting a little bit of assistance with that, but basically, Azure DevOps gives you so much stuff, but it's just like Jenkins. It's relatively straightforward to get things going. If you can build some tests that run on the command line, your tests should pretty much run in a container, on any of the CI platforms. So key learning for us, very important. We want to get some good test reporting on it. There's no point in having these tests on laptops. The definition of done for automation is never you've got some automation running on your laptop. It's got to be your automation's running in a CI platform, so it's shared. There shouldn't be anyone ever running tests on their laptop as the actual test. Needs to be up in DevOps. The reporting that you get gives you detail on overall success and failure. You get some good feedback, where to resolve problems. We did actually look originally at using the law reporting. I think a lot of people like that as a third-party reporting plugin. But to be honest with you, this comes built into Azure DevOps. It gives us all the functionality. So, why make our lives complicated with extra reporting frameworks when you get one for free in Azure DevOps? So, that was good. Another key learning for us, which was this was a difficulty we ran into, is just getting some DevOps help. It's all well and good saying that nowadays there's an expectation for testers to be T-shaped individuals, which I think is it's something where the industry does seem to be moving towards. You expect people to have a deep knowledge in testing and maybe a couple of other areas, but then a broad knowledge of, say, DevOps and a little bit of stuff about maybe databases and sort of supporting technologies and all that kind of stuff. Your knowledge can only go so far. You do need to rely on speaking to the experts. So that was very key for us to get some help when we were building the pipelines, get some support from the DevOps team get those pipelines up and running, make sure we're following their best practices. It lives in their world. You can't have yourself building a completely different way of doing something when it doesn't really meet their standards, because obviously you're not making any friends. And bear in mind, as I said, from a cultural perspective, we're coming in, we're all external to their organisation. We don't want to be upsetting things. We do need to be building relationships and playing nicely in their garden. So yeah. Another key learning for us was being adaptable around our approach. As I mentioned, we were getting support from the DevOps team, but they weren't able to provide us with all the support we needed. The original approach of us running our tests, our component tests in the pipelines, we weren't able to actually facilitate that, unfortunately. Given the lack of, overall lack of resource, it wasn't able for them to give us the time to do the bits of work we needed. We broke it all down into tickets, as I mentioned. We wanted to expose the port that was running, run some tests and make it a pass or fail case. We weren't able to do that in any sensible timeline. And as we were running, building things, we actually focused a lot more on our integration tests. Because the environments were very stable, we ended up with a very good set of stable tests of the integrated solution in a test environment, which somewhat did away with the necessity to run component level tests where mocks. I mean, I know it would be nice, and I think if you look at a lot of ways that people describe microservices testing, the best practice is to do component level testing, integration level testing, maybe of logical groups of components, and then system level testing. We pretty much over-indexed on integration, and we got some great feedback. We know it's good, the environments are stable, so we pretty much replaced our initial approach by just using greater integration test coverage. So, the key learning there is be adaptable. You start off with an approach, be aware that, that might change over time. It's not always possible, to stick with your plan. So you have to be flexible. So this then had some knock-on effects on where we originally planned to store our tests. So right at the start of the project, we thought, okay, we're going to build component tests. Logically, they need to sit in the same code base as the service. That makes total sense. So you get to reuse all the models. It's easy to fix problems because if you break the tests, with a break and change in the code, you can then fix the tests at the same time in the same PR. You don't have like two repos. Unfortunately, because of the way we'd gone down this route of building more integration tests but keeping the same code base, some of the testers had some accidents and caused the build to fail, which obviously made us look really bad. And again, multiple third parties, so we're getting eyes on from the core guys in the company, eyes on from the nearshore partners saying, you've broken the build, why are you putting this stuff in? So we had to have a conversation where we discussed where these things would really sit, and we basically said, yeah, okay, you're right. It is considered a best practice by Forbes, no less, but in this case, it doesn't really fit. Because of the way we changed our approach, we also had to change where we put our tests. So another key learning for us is definitely keep component tests in the same code repository as the service, because you can get the tight coupling and reuse of models, which makes total sense. Test breaking changes, as I mentioned, can be fixed in a single PR. And then if you've got higher level tests, it makes sense to keep those separate in a different repo. So the actual approach we took was single solution in a combined repository. So basically multiple CS proj files in a single SLN project. So it gives you the flexibility to run just one set of tests or all the tests across the whole solution. I suppose the key takeaway here is best practice isn't always the right choice. It's called best practice, but that doesn't mean you have to be a slave to it and just literally do what it says on the book. In the book, be adaptable. Our approach changed, so we had to change the way we were storing the tests. So, another key learning is test alerting. We were really keen about this. It was all well and good having all those tests running in the dashboards, in DevOps, but no one ever goes and looks at those. You're not going to send, people won't just routinely go and have a look in the dashboards every hour to see what the last test run was. So we built some alerting. The idea was that we want to send Slack notifications via a webhook because, as it says, tests aren't useful unless they're visible, and no one goes to dashboards. So yeah, this was relatively straightforward. What we wanted to do was just make sure that it's super visible for everybody, surface those results. So we implemented that with, it's quite simple actually. Slack and Teams both allow you to use webhooks. So you just create a webhook and then a very simple piece of code that just does a HTTP post and just with the message. So the way we implemented it is keep it concise, red or green icon, so people looking in the channel can instantly get some feedback. Only alert the channel with the @channel bomb when it actually fails. We don't just clutter people's alerts up. We provide a link to the test results as well. Why not? It's easy data to pull out. And how it actually works underneath is it's just another step in the Azure pipeline. It runs a PowerShell script. The PowerShell script processes the TRX file, pulls out the necessary bits of data, works out whether the test passed or failed, then just posts the message. So instant results. So onto the services themselves. So as I mentioned, there's a few services. I'm just going to touch on some of them, some of the more interesting ones. So the first one, as I mentioned, the postcode lookup service. It's just a wrap around a third-party API. So it's just pretty much a pass-through. So we didn't really need to take any sort of clever approach here. Postcode testing is, I think it's well understood. There's a lot of docs on the internet that tell you how to test postcodes because you don't always follow the same format. There's quite a few unique patterns of postcodes which are legitimate. So we ought to have those as positive tests, obviously put some negative tests in for invalid things. And then just some simple tests on lookup and search because the API gives you some advanced functionality as well. Not just about postcode, you can actually search for addresses by giving partial addresses. So we built up a set of tests. It was just implemented in C# with REST sharp and NUnit assertions. No need for any kind of BDD. We didn't build a BDD framework around any of these kind of things. We weren't getting the user stories in BDD, so why would we build a BDD test framework? So we just wrote them as straight up NUnit assertions. So that was pretty straightforward. And then for the orders database, this was another API, effectively wrapping around a data store. So this was where the customers, when they were walking through the e-commerce journey and selecting the various services that they wanted to build up, it would store effectively a GUID that was obviously hidden to them, which was their unique order, stash that in the database. So anytime they came back, they could pick up where they left off. The idea being that you want to maximize your conversion, so you want people to be able to pick up from where they left off. Conversion is a big, the conversion rate is really important for businesses in this sector. It's important for business in every sector, just to make sure that the customer gets the best experience. So this again was, just dismantling that monolith app that did everything and turning this part of it into just a nice API, few endpoints, exposing pretty much just the ability to create and then retrieve orders, based on those GUIDs. So pretty straightforward. Again, not massively complicated to test. Unfortunately, it would have been nice if we could have database access. So we'd have been able to then query at the lower level, but that wasn't possible to do. For various reasons, they didn't want anyone looking at it. Bizarrely, even from a read-only perspective, but okay, fine. We'll just sit on the API and just do all our tests through that black box and just assume that it works. So it's pretty straightforward as an implementation. Next service that was part of this project is the content API service. This is just fronting the CMS system, the content management system. So very, very, very straightforward. The CMS is managed by some other part of the business. The APIs here don't need to inject data. It's pretty much just retrieving various bits of CMS data. So again, very, very straightforward, similar sort of pattern, C#, REST sharp, and the NUnit assertions again. And then payments, pretty similar again, so pretty straightforward. The hardest thing to do was some of the bank validation stuff. There's some baked-in things that they had to test for around specific payment providers, but other than that, it was pretty much just sending stuff to a payment sandbox. I don't know if anyone's done anything around payments. All the payment providers provide you with a sandbox, which is live-like, but obviously doesn't do anything. So there was a sandbox deployed, the API wrapper around it, just send requests to it, get either successful payments using magic cards, magic credit card numbers, with fake CCV numbers, and just sending those payments. So again, pretty straightforward. Again, similar pattern: C#, REST sharp, NUnit assertions, all hooked into Azure DevOps. We get all the reporting for free. All those lovely dashboards and all that kind of stuff. So all good so far. until we ran into this. This is the core secret sauce of the business, is the pricing, how they price their services. And this was something that caused us quite a lot of grief. So it's a complex pricing algorithm, very complex, that's stored in the legacy system. So as I mentioned, this Monolith, it's got this crazy, for whatever, there's no other way to describe it. It's just a very complicated pricing algorithm because of the services they sell, and then the add-ons they sell, and then the other fees you have to add on. It's a very complex algorithm, and they are continually tweaking the way these things are weighted to provide various different pricing. I'll show you in a minute, when you see one of the pricing grids, you'll see just how complicated it is. There's a wide range of products that they support, multiple types of service, as I mentioned, multiple add-ons for some of those services, and then additional fees that may or may not apply. And for each of the types of prices, it's affected by what's called a source and promo code, which is what they call that's internally how they change their pricing models. So when they're working with a new affiliate, the source and promo code change, and that tweaks how the prices work. I imagine it's on some kind of curve where there's like a distribution of prices in some manner. I don't really 100% know. It's like I say, it's their secret sauce. But we had to test this pricing. Well, the dev team had to implement it, and then obviously we had to test it. So the pricing algorithm, other than in the legacy system, also exists in a spreadsheet. However, it's known that the Excel implementation algorithm is buggy. They know that it's incorrect, so there are outliers. The pricing team know this. The testers who've worked there forever know this. We don't know the business domain that well, so some of the things we were looking at wouldn't seem to be making any sense. Why is this price not affecting? Why is this price not affected by these particular add-ons? And it was like, oh well, that's just a business rule. It's always been like that. But the spreadsheet was saying something different. So there wasn't really a source of truth. We were getting some numbers from spreadsheets as test data, but we couldn't rely on them all, which is really frustrating. As I mentioned, those price changes, they're all distributed to the manual testers in XLS format. And because they had that knowledge, the manual testers, again, I mentioned, these are subject matter experts who've worked in the business, they understand the business domain. They would know what to test for and what not to test for. Us coming in, from a relatively inexperienced, we kind of know a little bit about it, but not a lot. It was very, very difficult, very frustrating for the testers on the ground who are trying to understand this system. And this is one of the price grids. Now, there's actually 4 of these grids per source code and promo code, and then there are multiple source and promo codes for every affiliate that they deal with. So it's super complicated. These are the core prices. These are all the add-ons that you might want, which vary, because again, with a different source and promo code, all of those things will be different. It just multiplies out into crazy infinity. These are distributed to the manual testers I mentioned. When the price change goes in, the testers try a few combinations. Clearly, they're not going to try all of them, which literally exposes a massive hole. There's no way that anyone could legitimately test all the possible combinations in a human lifetime. It's just crazy difficult. As I mentioned, they also require that knowledge. They have that knowledge in their heads of the bits that don't make any sense. So clearly, they will be testing just narrow bits of the app that they understood. These journeys through the e-commerce journey of starting off, selecting the things you wanted, selecting the add-ons that may or may not make sense, working all the way through, tweaking a couple of things, then other fees being added, which part of the background, part of the sort of background process until the end price was displayed, and then checking it on the grid to see if it made sense. Starting with the price here on one of the grids, then adding 2 or 3 of those things. So yeah, very, very complicated. Doesn't help us from a test automation perspective. Yes, we could possibly do some crazy things where we sort of start reading bits of spreadsheet here and bits of it here, and then squirreling numbers away, and then running a test, making a GET request to the API, getting the response back, and then working out which of the numbers should be where, etc., etc. That was just untenable. That was just something we couldn't do. What we wanted was pricing in a machine readable format. We wanted a core pricing table. We wanted all the optionals and stuff, and we wanted we needed the separate fees. It wasn't possible for us to get it all in one data file. We couldn't get engagement from the pricing team to generate it, because again, this is an ask for the business. They've got their own day jobs to do. They can't spend maybe 2 or 3 days writing another output from the spreadsheet, from the back-end pricing generator to generate as the data in a machine readable format. So, and we did reach out to various people around the business, but we just couldn't get the data in the format we wanted, so we had to basically DIY it. So yeah, we got the core prices, we had to inline the optionals ourselves with a copy and paste job, but we wrote a doc on how to do it. And then for the additional fees, that was just a separate spreadsheet that we also looked up. So that kind of looks a bit like this. So we had all our core prices, and then it's not pictures, but there was another separate table which just had the fees that were looked up based on the things you chose. Would then go and look up the right bit or the add-on fee and add that on. So for us, it was clear. Well, cleaner, I won't say clear, it's cleaner. At least it was maintainable and extensible in that we weren't relying on the positions of anything in the spreadsheet. It was just read it all the way across line by line and then send all those requests off. So we could build, we could make it a machine readable, and relatively easy, because ultimately we want to automate this. It's probably worth mentioning that all of these APIs did have a nice Swagger doc, and we could obviously explore them manually with the Swagger doc and also use Postman. But as I said, the implementation of these tests, we wanted to do it using, put it into CI, and we wanted to use C#. We could have used Postman and Newman, but we selected C#. So it's worth mentioning that for the initial release, which is the MVP for one of their affiliates, there will be 900 lines of data for a single data set, just for a single, just for the single customer journey from that affiliate. So that's 900 lines of actual data plus, as I mentioned, the other thing. What that looked like on the other end, this is the other challenge, is, I can't quite read that, can you? Sorry. Right, this is JSON data, and there's some prices there. Suffice to say, there's a lot. So you get 180 lines back of JSON for every request you make. So this is the core pricing. These are the differentials. So because it's for the front end. So the back end tells you what all the other things are you can add. They're the codes, and then what the price is. That's the price diff, and then the price total. So that was coming back in the response. Obviously, that's all data that we need to assert on. So the way we actually approach this from a verification perspective is, as I mentioned, we've got those responses coming back via the differentials. We know that there's multiple options and related assertions required for each of that. And as I highlighted, there was no way that those manual testers were getting anywhere near covering this. So we were already showing value to the business by saying, look, test automation is giving you something that you would never, ever be able to do manually. So as I mentioned, we've got those 180 lines of JSON coming back. The required assertions, frustratingly, are dependent on the products you're selecting. So we've actually got different sets of tests depending on which bit of the spreadsheet we're in. But for an example, 212 lines of data, which was the small frag of data we used right at the start, that resulted in 2016 tests, because it multiplies by 3, then by 5. We actually have nested loops of the tests. So for each line of data, we run 15 sets of tests over that, and each one of those tests has multiple assertions. So you can see this multiplying out. There's absolutely no way that a human could ever possibly do that. And as I mentioned, it just exposed all those limitations in the manual testing. So the key learning there for us as a team, and this is obviously a takeaway, in general, is when you're working in a big organisation, is build relationships across the wider team. It's so important to talk to people, gain some domain knowledge. Obviously, a lot of business domains are fairly straightforward. If it's like e-commerce where you're buying goods, it's kind of pretty straightforward. You understand like the mechanics of a shopping basket and all those kind of things. This is about selling services. It's a lot more complicated, and some things just don't make sense. Well, they do when you understand it, but they don't if you look from the outside looking in. And for us, getting the data in a usable format, and then it allowed us to build a nice data-driven pattern for testing with nested loops, and us asserting on all the relevant values to really deliver some value, so we could be 100% certain that the re-implementation of the price algorithm matched the existing one in the monolith. Because obviously if we got that wrong, the risk would be that you'd have some outliers. Potentially you could have some set of products and services priced too cheaply, so the business wouldn't make any money, they'd be giving stuff away for free, or an outlier the other way, something too expensive, so people would go, I'm not paying that, and there wouldn't be the conversion rate would drop off. which is then obviously a massive risk. So yeah, so that was key for us to get that data in that format. Moving on to the front end, so this is a live project. We are still working on this. So literally, like last week, the front end team have been spun up, brought into existence. The idea is this rebuild of all the components, being replaced by the React.js components. So we had to develop an approach around front end testing. So clearly, JavaScript developers love a bit of JavaScript. It's a really aggressive timeline as well. There was no way we were going to sell them any Selenium into that. They were just not interested in Selenium at all. They had a much better idea. They wanted to use Cypress, which makes total sense. Cypress has support for React component testing out of the box. You can spin up a component on its own. It doesn't have to be on a web page, just spins up in memory, and you can do some testing on it. So absolutely 100% makes sense. And the key learning here is heterogeneous testing tools are fine. Don't get wedded to one set of tools. Use the right tool for the job. So we're going to carry on using Selenium and C# for our end-to-end test because that's something that we're familiar with, and it fits because we also want to use some of our API tests that we've already written. So using common language C#, reusing some components makes total sense. So yeah, for us, the front-end approach that we're recommending across the entire dev team is for component testing, use JavaScript. It's going to be written by developers anyway, so they're going to maintain it. JS is their preferred language for us because we've been brought in and we've already started C#, and it's a C# house anyway. We're going to use Selenium C# for the end-to-end testing. Luckily, because we've got all of these key journeys already covered by the APIs, we don't need to worry too much about hammering, well, we wouldn't do it anyway. Can you imagine trying to do all of those price journeys through the front end? Adding something to the basket, adding an add-on, going through, clicking yes, clicking no, getting the price. Is the price right? Okay, fine. Drop that session, start again, pick a different product. It would just take forever. So the key thing is we're going to run just the key journeys, do minimal pricing tests. Obviously, I'm going to do some. The scope for this is we're going to run all the browsers we care about initially in VMs. Eventually, we're going to start moving to a cloud-based provider, probably Browser Stack or Source. For the platforms and devices we need to test on, that's going to be metrics driven. So we're going to get some metrics out of the business right now on what they currently get the most the most revenue out of by device, and make those devices our core devices. So if they get a lot of traffic through iOS, if that's where their most conversions come from, then we prioritize those devices. It's probably fair to say that we could also just do it by just looking at what's available and going, right, current version of iOS, last version of iOS, small screen, big screen, do the same for Android. But we want to do it metrics driven just to make sure we're prioritizing those devices just to make sure that we've got everything covered. And then ultimately looking at using Google Lighthouse to measure the non-functional characteristics of the site. Obviously, it's very important for customers to have that crisp, interactive feel to a website. What they don't want to be do is waiting for something to load. So we want to set up some kind of metrics on the non-functionals for the front end, just to make sure that the site loads quickly, that it feels good. And Google Lighthouse, that's something you can just run in a container. So we're just going to bake that into as part of the process. Just to give us some of that feedback. And then once we've started measuring it, then we can pass that to the business and perhaps set some NFRs for them. Another key learning, pyramids. Don't at all. Don't interpret it literally. Because if you think about, as I just mentioned, with our journey, we completely changed our approach. We hardly do any component testing. So arguably that will be a test trophy, which just isn't a helpful analogy at all. I think this kind of stuff, it's just not helping, it just makes things confusing. I think the pyramid works figuratively if you sort of say to people, think about more tests at a lower level. Okay, the pyramid kind of works, but don't break it down to the nth degree and get all hung up on, I've not got any, I've got loads of unit tests, but no component tests, and I've only got a couple of integration tests, and draw some kind of weird picture. No, just focus on testing where it makes sense, which is probably the lower level, but try not to make it look like an ice cream cone, because that's definitely an anti-pattern. So yeah. So just to recap, these are the takeaways for us, and the takeaways that I want to share with you today. Hopefully, some or all of these should be useful. So first off, agree an approach as soon as possible. So work with the business, work with the wider teams, especially if you're coming in working with people who aren't in your organisation. There's always going to be a little bit of resistance. You're bringing in some new ideas. they might be resistant to change, so you need to work with them, not against them. Get the support you need, scale it if necessary. So if it's outside of your technical expertise, reach out. Those DevOps guys are great. Okay, you're normally snowed under, but they'll try and help you if they can, but also be adaptable. If things aren't working, maybe best practice isn't best fit. So think about changing your approach. Don't be a slave to whatever all the blog posts are telling you to do. React, adapt, and keep tech choices simple where possible. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. If there's something that'll do, it doesn't need to be the next new shiny thing. Use the thing that works. As I said, we could have gone to law reporting. It doesn't really give us a lot more than the DevOps stuff does. So why would we do it? Just more grief. Make sure you're running tests frequently and surface the test results. So important. Make sure that all that stuff's visible. You want to be making sure that everyone who needs to know can find out. Get it in Slack, get it in Teams, so that if the test environment goes down, everyone knows. If the stage environment goes down, the people who need to know, people can then react. Get that information out to them. Business domain knowledge is crucial, especially if it's a weird business domain. As testers, you can't just be given a list of stuff to test. I mean, that's probably old school testing. Right now, we're expected to think out the box, so you need to understand it a bit. So really get into it. As I said, some things are straightforward, some things aren't. It helps if you understand what's really going on behind the scenes and the way the business functions. It'll inform you in the way you think about testing. Use the right tool for the right job. Don't be a slave to we're just using Selenium. There are other choices. We could have gone Playwright. We could have potentially have gone completely bizarre and gone, we're just going to use C# backend, Cypress front end. But we wanted to leverage some of the API testing code we'd written. When we drive our front end, we want to be able to check the cached orders. We need to test that through the API. We could re-implement all that stuff, but why not just use some code we've already written? Why reinvent the wheel? So you just pick the right thing. And as I mentioned, don't worship ancient relics. So that's it. That's me. Anyone got any questions? Yep, fire away.
Did you get a lot of crap for the channel instead of here in that Slack?
No, right. So no, because we've played the game sensibly. We created a channel, and we did a lot of testing on it before we invited everyone in. So.
Follow-up would be basically, did you get notification fatigue?
Pardon?
Notification fatigue?
Yeah. Well, I've got it on mute. So I think that is the risk. But you've got to surface the the right amount of information. So when it does go down, we want people to look at it. So I think it's about putting it into the right channel. So don't have a channel where all the alerts go. If you expect the dev environment to go up and down, then stick it in a channel. But maybe everyone will have it on mute because they don't really care. But for an environment that's shared, really everyone should be all over that and making sure that if it goes down, someone's looking at it and going, why are the tests failed? Why is the environment broken? Who broke it? Can we get it fixed? Is it environmental? Is it because of a recent deployment, or is it just the tests are wonky? I totally take your point. That sort of notification fatigue. People just mute it, and then all that stuff becomes useless. So you've got to be careful about how you surface this information. If we'd just invited everyone into the channel while we were testing it, they would have all put it on mute. So good point. Yep.
So we are also going through similar kind of transformation, and we are facing the same kind of challenges and doing the same kind of test approach as well. So one thing where we get stuck is we have an old monolithic system, and in parallel we are running a new system, all microservices, and there is integration between both of them. So where we get stuck is the end-to-end part. How much end-to-end testing we should be doing, and who should own it, because these are all microservices owning their own test. But then if we have a set of end-to-end tests, then who's responsible for them? Or can it be forgotten because every feature team will say, our team passed me.
Well, it definitely shouldn't be forgotten. I think that's the thing. I suppose that's a challenge for the business. I guess you should be escalating up through the product people to say that this is an important part of regression testing is that we test. Who should own it?
We want a release team, or we just want microservices team, but who should be responsible for looking at those tests? Everybody is releasing at the same time, and so should they wait for those tests to finish before they release, or is there a problem like one microservice A has some breaking change with microservice B, but they are testing on their older version?
Well, that is 100% one of the problems with microservices is the idea of contract-based testing. So if every microservice is owned by someone else, there's, you need to set either use the packed framework or some other way of doing contract testing. Right, yeah. Yeah.
But the problem is these end-to-end part, where should that sit?
Yeah, well, organisationally for the project we're working on, because it will ultimately be handed back over into the internal organisation. It's going to sit with that internal development team because they own initially just that MVP journey. So it's one affiliate, which is the new set of journeys, and the new journey for that affiliate. And it is very much almost like a from scratch because they've got no automation at all. So it's new. I guess in your organisation, I suppose if I were you, I would be reaching out to the product people and saying, you know, we now need to find owners for this and maintain it because you can't just write the tests, run them, and then leave them. They're gonna need to be maintained. Yeah.
It should be owned by
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Well, anyone who changes the front end should make sure the test pass. I mean that's 100%. 100% important that everyone's responsible for quality. So if those tests are failing, it shouldn't be a finger pointing. Well, it's sort of a finger pointing exercise, but everyone should care that the tests are failing. Someone should be worrying about it and getting it passing.
everyone owns it, so it's kind of like nobody owns it.
Okay, yeah, I guess that's more of an organisational challenge than a tech challenge, but yeah, I would definitely be speaking to the product people about.
What about like end-to-end performance testing? Because we are going with the policy that if it's not your system, you're not responsible for it, or don't have the control of the performance. But then that is also important that when everything comes together and hangs together, should we do end-to-end performance testing as well?
Definitely, because if any one of your components slows down the overall journey, that might mean that all your customers, stop engaging with your product. I mean, it could be that a back-end service is slow to respond, and that slows down the whole journey. So, all of those things need to be measured, and how you measure it, I guess, it depends on, the internal owners and where your non-functionals are. But I do think that Google Lighthouse, would be a good first step. Measure the app through Lighthouse and just see what it's like.
Yeah, we are doing Google Lighthouse as well
Right.
for each of those pages.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you just said obviously everyone's responsibility, but then you also said earlier that obviously develop testers don't get involved in unit tests, so those two things that
Well, I think in general, testers don't normally write unit tests. It's normally a preserve of the developer. And I guess it's the difference between test running on just a single component or it running dynamically in a deployed environment. So arguably, you could also say that potentially component tests shouldn't be owned by the testers either. Anything that's just centered purely on the component on its own should be owned by the developers. Everything outside is the testers. It all depends on how your organisation works. But I think in general, it's quite common for testers may, I guess, get involved with defining unit testing. Certainly if you're following good practices and left shifting, any sort of new functionality, testers really should be talking to developers before they're writing any code and just saying how you're building it, because here's how I'm going to test it. Collaborating, pairing, having some input. So yeah, it just depends on how your organisation approaches that, testing and development.
This just a question.
Oh, yeah.
So you mentioned how you're contracting, you're doing this from another organisation, and you said that they didn't have any automation skills. What are you doing to make sure, you built all this amazing stuff, what are you doing to upskill the organisation you're working for and building that capability in those teams so you don't just hand this stuff over and then
Right, so yeah, organisationally, this particular company have got challenges around hiring. So the reason why they've brought in contractors and consultants to do it is because they need to they basically need to transform quickly, or whatever the word is, evolve. They need to evolve quickly. They're finding it really difficult to hire testers. I think we'll all appreciate that you've probably, a lot of people are moving around, testing, test skills, testers. Sam will tell you, there's a lot of people hiring a lot of testers right now. So there's, all the talent pools have been drained. Everyone's paying good money. This organisation can't afford right now to pay permies. Well, they're not in the right sort of mindset to reassess everyone, reband them all, and pay what is considered as fair market value. So they can't hire the talent in they need. Ultimately, their plan is to hire in the talent, not just the testers, but also the developers, which will then have the skills. So they'll bring that in and then grow the rest of the organisation up. Because they've got a core set of testers, as I mentioned, that came through from the contact centre, if you like, that part of the business. But they are non-technical people. They've got excellent domain knowledge, but they don't know how to code. They're still useful as testers. They are really good testers. They just can't write code.
That wasn't my question, though.
Sorry.
What are you doing?
Oh, what am I doing?
Yeah, what are you and your
Me personally? Oh no, well, our organisation has been brought in, and we've been brought in as part of another organisation. So it's not on us to do it. We're just delivering our testing services. But we've given them some advice on what they should do, because we're talking to the wider business. We're talking to the test leads and the other test people. But our organisation has just been brought in to do a specific task. So, but the overall organisation is aware, and that's ultimately their goal, is they're going to the ownership of this is going to be handed off internally eventually. So we'll all ramp off. We're not going to be with that company for the rest of the lifetime of the project. It will be handed over to them for them to own, run and develop internally. Yeah, but right now it's a short-term tactical solution because they've got a problem. Strategically, they do need to upskill their entire organisation, and they're aware of it. Not just in testing, it's in development as well.
Cool.
Okay.
All right, Steve, that was amazing. Thank you so much.
Cheers all.